Hello, my name is Matt Talbert. I'm Senior Research Manager at the Association for Supply Chain Management. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Today's topic will be on the supply chain workplace in a post-pandemic world. So as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic rattled the workplace. It forced many professionals across all industries to work at home in the interest of safety from a deadly virus. But now as vaccination rates rise and the pandemic is beginning to subside, many workplaces are struggling to find the right balance between returning to the office, keeping people at home, or somewhere in between. This is a challenge that is going to impact supply chain as well. So to sort of discuss the predicament of that challenge, we have a panel of 3 experts today. I'm going to let them go around the horn and introduce themselves, starting with Amy Augustine.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Augustine. I'm currently the Director of Network Supply Chain and Indirect Procurement for US Cellular. I've been with US Cellular just about 13 years, and I have over 20 plus years of supply chain experience. I also hold my CSMP certification and have been involved with ASCM for a number of years.
All right, thank you, Amy. James Hess also joins us as well.
Hi, my name's Jim Hess. I'm a director on the board of ASCM, and every day in corporate engineering, I run Google's reverse logistics supply chain.
Great, thanks, James. And Pedro Neto, the third panelist today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pedro Neto. I'm a supply chain data scientist at HP. I have a PhD from Penn State University in operations research. And I also have the pleasure of serving as the chair of the risk committee here at ASCM, and which we've done a lot of different work looking at the research, and most notably the past couple of years, looking at sensing top trends. So look out for content for that in the coming months.
Great, thank you, Pedro. And I'm actually going to throw the first question to you of today's panel. So the biggest question that comes to mind would be, what supply chain jobs can work from home and why can they work from home? And then maybe which ones need to be in an office or a factory floor?
Yeah, I would actually reverse the question. And this is kind of what the forcing function that pandemics have really showed us, is it kind of forces us to think, okay, which jobs really, why can't they be worked from home? So kind of reversing the question and just assuming, okay, is there a good reason why this has to be done in the office or in the workplace? So I think there's going to be a spectrum of people, and there's going to be case by case. So just my 2 cents of the framework that employers will think through. There's going to be some people on one end of the spectrum that are just no-brainers. They work in finance, or like a data scientist like myself. They work for a worldwide organization. They're doing all these meeting calls. Anyway, it's not to say that there isn't value going to the office, but those are just slam dunks. And then there will be other people like the forklift drivers, the truck drivers in today's technology environment that they're obvious. But in the middle, there's going to be a range of people, and it's going to be case by case. So just asking the question, is there something physical that is essential to this job? And sometimes this can be a little bit overwhelming, but even just doing a simple exercise of mapping what your roles inside your company are. Okay, what is this person responsible for? What are their inputs? What are their outputs? What do they do on a day-to-day basis? And once you go through that mapping process, it's going to be pretty obvious of like, well, sometimes they can do this part working remotely, but if they need to like physically check on a factory line or physically go into a factory core team meeting and help drive that, that's just a quick little check off of like, yeah, this aspect rolls. But then even for some of these gray areas, as you kind of go through the spectrum, you should also have a growth mindset to think, well, is that limitation just because of the tools and processes and capabilities that I have today? Or with some investment in video conferencing equipment, or maybe some more flexible arrangements on different office locations, or other different types of interconnections, can I overcome some of those barriers? With the obvious, if there's something like, a forklift driver or some physical manufacturing, those jobs are obviously going to be physically in our presence for a long time to come. But in the longer term, we see like with intuitive surgeons, performing surgeons around the world with different robotics and different analytics, just keep in mind that, what you do today is going to be an ongoing continuous process as you keep evolving and technology keeps advancing us forward.
Great, thank you, Pedro. Amy, next question is for you. So a hybrid workplace presents some advantages and disadvantages. So what might some of those be?
So Matt, let's talk about advantages first. So advantages is, associate employee retention, right? So the best of both worlds, being able to have your home office and then the ability to go into an office, to have those times to collaborate, to have those strategy sessions, those whiteboarding sessions, to have those personal interactions, to build those relationships. So to me, I think it's the best of both worlds. And the key here is flexibility, right? So being able to give your associates and your employees that flexibility to do what's right for them, to do their best work for your company. And so that's, to me, is the big key advantage is having that flexibility element to help, retain and even gain employees, right? So this is a game changer, right? Not everyone's moving to 100% remote or hybrid. Like some companies are going back to their old traditional models. And so you can really use this as a selling point to gain and retain your associates. From a disadvantage point of view, I think sometimes it's going to be the scheduling piece of it, right? So making sure you can get everybody together in those days in the office at the same time. So I think there's going to be this element of a lot more planning and thoughtfulness that has to go into when you're going to be in the office versus knowing that you're going to be there 5 days a week, right? And a lot of coordination with your peers, your other, the people you need to collaborate to make sure they're all there at the same time. So I think that's going to be one of the really big disadvantages is really being mindful and planful and planning out when you're going to be there versus I'm going to be there and I know, Matt, you're going to be there too and we can get together and meet. So now it might be, oh, Matt, you're not going to be in the office for 4 weeks. Now so I think there's going to be some growing pains through that. I also think the disadvantage would be, one of them is the technology piece a little bit, like having half your people on a Zoom or Teams call and the other half in person sometimes. How effective is that? I mean, I think we've all gotten really used to being on video calls and knowing and, being able to read body language on video calls, the same as if we were all in the conference room. But now we're going to have an environment where maybe half of us are in a conference room and half of us are on Zoom. So how do you make sure that meetings are very effective when you might have a mixed, technology, mixed media going on in the room? So.
Great, thank you, Amy. Jim, the next question is for you, and that is, what leadership skills are needed to manage a hybrid team?
Matt, just as Amy alluded to, we expect hybrid to be much more difficult than just all remote or all in the office. But rest assured, good leadership is good leadership wherever it is. There's the same characteristics that make a person a good leader at home or in the office is universal. But there are some mindfulness things that we need to take special care for and to realize what others are going through, because we'll have workers who will be fully remote and we'll have others that are fully in the office. And we want to also be cognizant of what they're going through in their lives. And more importantly, we need to include both groups together, either in a meeting or just in essential communication. So there cannot be an inside or an outside to the team. Everybody is on the team and they're contributors. And along those lines of everybody, regardless of where they work, they need to be held accountable for those deliverables, just as people are today too. So there's no free rides. Everybody pulls a weight on a team, and I think we will all be looking at each other and evaluating each other's contributions, either virtually or physically. But though, as a leader, above that fray, though, we cannot be so attracted to the variable of, is this person remote or is this person working on a team, and just those tactical day-to-day things. We still have to provide that strategic direction for the team, be that guiding light through those foggy conditions and uncertainty, because we're still in a period that has a squishy road, and that leadership is still required to to put those objectives out and to be that strategic guiding light.
You bring up an interesting point about the importance of leadership that I hadn't thought of going into this panel until you hit it on the nail so hard. I wonder from our other two panelists, Amy and Pedro, if you have a little bit of insight from your organizations on leading a hybrid or a remote team. Pedro, I'll let you take a shot first.
Yeah, so largely here in the US, offices at HP are still closed. There are some target dates for some offices to open up. And that framework in which HP and many other companies of what the medical science of it has stayed pretty firm, and they are keeping to that criteria. But planning ahead to that rough September 1st, we've had offices all over the world that have been, at times have been in lockdowns and then not, and then back in, and have been completely adjusting. More recently, they're starting to get more here at HP, more firm at looking at that mapping process that I alluded to, looking at a job category, start splitting that out of, what is the natural way that we can kind of cleave our workforce. And just being a large multinational corporation, we could have, the benefit of these very formal HR kind of job families codes and mapping that out. So all of us have, just looking at by our job families, have been able to look to see where we roughly look. So some of us are going to be in the office as is. People are looking at like pipettes and lab equipment and looking at, very precise giant lab things. To some select people, they're going to be fully remote for extenuating circumstances, think of like call centers or some other extenuating circumstances. Then a large group of us are going to be in this hybrid where we'll be expected to go 2 to 3 days per week. Now, there is, as Jim mentioned, a broad strategy, but I think many organizations, including HP, also know that there's going to be some particular differences. So there's still the flexibility of having discussions with managers and looking at a case-by-case basis and to see, stepping back, what is best for the organization and our customers, and then work backwards from that and just see how our workforce case-by-case basis fits into that.
Great, thanks, Pedro. And then Amy, if you have any insight on some of the challenges, difficulties of, or maybe it's been very helpful to manage a remote team, if you don't mind speaking to managing people from a distance.
Absolutely. So for me personally, I actually years ago had a remote associate who was in Dallas, Fort Worth area, and I was in Chicago. And this was prior to all this, we got this great technology of video. And so even then it was a challenge to make sure he was engaged and, felt part of the team, right? And, I think things have gotten better now that we have Teams and Zoom and we can manage, a remote team much easier. But there also is something said to be about in that room face to face with the person and having a conversation. And so I know at US Cellular, we've rolled out our program. We've announced our return date that the offices are going to reopen. We've done the same exercise as HP. HR has gone through and categorized us all into 3 different categories: 100% full-time, revolving, or 100% remote. And the bulk of us who work in technical and professional are considered revolving, right? So same thing, we'll be expected in the office 1 to 2 days a week and the rest of the time at home. But the one thing I have to say about US Cellular, we've done a really nice job of starting to prep our leaders. We have leader guides to help them have those conversations with their associates. We actually have a group of volunteers that are in our offices currently that we're getting feedback on and how do we make adjustments. So when the offices do open up at the end of August, we know what works and what doesn't, and we can continue to make those adjustments as needed. And, with the pandemic still going on, there are some challenges with hybrid, but, we feel like we're well positioned to work through them. But, like I said, there's a lot of focus that's been put on leaders and giving us guides and giving us tools to help us manage our team and learn how to manage a team effectively, right? Like, I don't think it's just easy that people pick this up like that. I mean, if you're very much a black and white type person, this is very difficult, right? Because you can't see what your associates are doing right in front of you. But we have to be able to have that trust factor with associates. And so I think that is huge for even hybrid to be successful, is you have to have the trust in your associates that they're getting their work done.
Great, thank you. Pedro, I'm going to bounce back to you and think you're talking to maybe a CSCO, Chief Supply Chain Officer, and they're wondering how long is it going to take to adapt to this hybrid environment and what sort of growing pains am I going to expect? What might you say to that Chief Supply Chain Officer?
Yeah, we're going to sound a little bit like a broken record here, but I think all of us agree that the leadership kind of sets the pace. Thankfully, things like procuring software and like the technical things generally are not going to be the bottleneck. And for most organizations, this pandemic really showed how fast you can kind of move, kind of going back to that forcing function. So a lot of people and organizations are kind of already used to that from a shock perspective. Think about just going to the cold ocean. We initially go in, but once you're in there, kind of got used to it. So I think a lot of organizations are kind of primed past that shock factor. Now they can just start incorporating that into their culture and seeing it what it comes down. But to build off of Amy's point, the trust, that management of change as a leader, that's really going to set the pace. And I think a lot of people in general make the mistake of you can be two-faced in the sense that, I'm going to enact as a leader sets of policies, but maybe I don't live them myself and maybe my workers will notice. But, especially when it comes to a culture and things working, people see right through that. So ask yourself as a leader, are you really doing this from a place of sincerity and being genuine and being transparent? And, you got to walk the walk and talk the talk at the same time, because people can see right through that. There's also the analogy it can make with, with government and even military leaders. If you have a commander leaving on the battlefield that's leading with the charge and run alongside the frontline shoulders, that's going to be a different tone than someone who's, perceived weak or, being conflicting messages. The organization is going to reflect a lot about that. And then you can also look internally when you've done other periods of change management, of like changing systems or reorganization or an office is closing or all these other things. These are all cultural changes that workforces go through, and each organization has a culture of how growth mindset they are and how they can adapt. And I think this applies right to that. You're not going to get it right on your first time, and that's fine. You go through iterations, you learn, you pick up, and it's really you as a leadership team that's going to dictate that pace of how well you transition if you have not done it already.
Great, thanks. Amy, you sort of touched on this briefly, but this is a major topic in the discussions at remote workplaces. What's it going to look like in the future? And in speaking with you in our Research and Innovation Strategy Committee meetings, it seems US Cellular has dabbled in this quite a bit. So the big question is, have you noticed any sort of impact on your ability to hire and retain talent in transitioning to this post-pandemic world?
So I've been able to hire talent, and actually I think being able to talk about the hybrid work model in the future actually helped me have somebody who chose to come to my team versus another company. So for me, I think hybrid was a great thing and a great selling point, especially when this person that I hired lives in Rockford, Illinois, and now she only has to drive 1 or 2 days a week to our office in Chicago versus 5 days a week. And so, I think there was a comfort level knowing that, hey, I can be remote. I'm going to be able to have this flexible schedule and not be so concerned about having to drive 5 days a week. And if anyone knows, it's probably about an hour and a half drive, depending on the time of day, from where our office is by O'Hare out to Rockford. So, for her, great commute time, right? And, when I think of the psyche of a lot of our associates at US Cellular, a lot of them, why they don't want to come back to the office is a little bit of, I don't want my commute anymore. And I'd be the first person to admit it. I don't miss my 30-mile one-way commute. The money that they're saving and not having to buy lunch and gas and tolls, and totally get that concept. But we're trying to flip it on the outside too. selling it somebody to come to US Cellular, selling our own associates to say, hey guys, we're not asking you to come 5 days a week. We're asking you to come 1 to 2. And, maybe it's 2 mornings and where traffic is better. So using that same type of how I would sell an outside associate to come work for US Cellular, I have to use the same thing to convince my current associates to, hey, we're coming back to the office and this is a really good thing, right? We'll be able to see each other in person. And yes, it's not 5 days at home anymore, but it's also not 5 days in the office. So, it's using that same type of selling to hopefully keep and retain my current associates.
Being a fellow Chicagolander, I know how our expressways could get in January and February, but even in July and June, there could be a couple lane closures too.
Exactly.
The next question I'm going to throw to Jim, where you're located. I don't think you deal with snow too often. But the question for you is, what sorts of challenges have you had to overcome during the transition? And has it also sparked, say, some ideas and innovation?
That's a great question, Matt. Thanks. It just as kind of an FYI, I work out of the New York City office for Google in corporate engineering. I spent 5 years in the Bay Area, though, on the mothership. But I've regressed to Vermont, to a remote work site up here for the last year. Didn't regress, but I'm enjoying the remote opportunity. But in answering your question, I have to say that it has been challenging. Certainly there are more pleasant aspects to working remotely in Vermont. But Google is famous for its campuses and its office locations, and how they build a collaborative environment where you can bring your whole self to work every day and be comfortable from breakfast through dinner, and that's fantastic. I love it. So when I'm home, I use all the collaborative tools that we have, but the challenge in working for me specifically, and I don't know if this is shared with any other panel members, but I think it's fairly common, is that people are challenged to have day-to-day focus on their tasks at hand, either it be at home or at work, because working remotely, sometimes the home and work kind of blend. And it's a challenge on providing the right attention to the right thing at the right time. So creating for yourself those rigidly segmented time periods where you can meet all your requirements is a challenge for me, and I suspect for others as well. And as we mentioned before we went live here today, hey, let's be sure that we don't have our 4-year-olds straight into the meeting today. But there are those times where distractions just come about. I can't tell you how many remote calls I've had, even speaking engagements where a delivery driver came knocking at my door in the middle of it. So those distractions do show up, and they do kind of abut your ability to focus on that. But amidst that environment, and I think we all share in it, I'm personally challenged to be more efficient in my communication. As working remotely, I've noticed I've spent more time in meetings now than I do when I'm in the office. And I think that's all part of being a part of a remote community that has to check in. And even the smallest meeting invitation is still 15 minutes. And that time is valuable once you add it up across the calendar. And that doesn't help in the focus realm, but you set some ground rules on what you will engage in and how you will engage is helpful, and especially with your team. On when you will talk, what frequency and types of meetings are important. But I noticed what helps me is to just be direct and get things done. You can set social meeting times or more casual engagements, but if it's a meeting to get things done, should have an agenda, should have an outcome, and it should have those limitations. Taking from innovation side, how does this environment kind of foster what can be as far as the next I've seen some interesting workspaces for remote workers. Just on the other side of the session, in lighting and even set design sometimes. From my company at Google, we released a project that we're doing called Campfire, and it's designed to be inclusive of a work environment. Say, for example, you have a team of, 5 to 7 people, and they all share the same meeting experience, whether or not they're remote or in person. So there is a meeting room, and that meeting room has monitors around. It's more in the shape of a circle. But that's some innovation that I don't think we would have otherwise come at the same way without the pandemic. So necessity is the mother of invention for some cases. And along the necessity side, just one last point is that Google, after, like many offices, after we shut our offices during the outbreak, we had to create a direct supply chain or direct channel in our omni-channel supply chain. Some people call it DTC, or some people call it a B2C. So instead of working on brick and mortar supply chains where people go to their campus and go to a computer place and get their accessories or get their devices delivered to their desk, we can't do that in an office closed environment. But we did have to build that direct channel where people can have that experience where you can order something and it shows up at your house. So that is something that was built on top of our brick and mortar supply chain. So now we have a hybrid direct channel, and then we have the standard, what we call our work from office channel as well. So that layer of innovation was directly related to our ability to continue operations, during our office closure period.
Jim, thank you. That's some really interesting insight. Does anyone else on the panel have any sort of cool ideas or innovation that sparked as a result of remote work?
So Jim, just building on your point to bring your whole self to work and bringing in a related topic of diversity and inclusion, really important topic. It's been important, it's important now, and will be forever important. The analogy that I've used at HP with diversity and inclusion, diversity can be thought of being invited to the dance, getting the right people inside of the room. But inclusion goes one step deeper of being asked to dance, that real empathetic and genuine going through. And I believe that actually using a work from home and hybrid environment can actually increase that inclusion. Going to the office, everyone is kind of on the same page. The old mindset is this kind of, leave your personal life at home, you walk into the office, we're all kind of monoliths, and then you kind of leave back your personal life. And the working from home, you start to get to that blend. People can choose to be more private, but when you have your little kid walking in, or I need to go to the grocery store in the morning because that's when I feel safer, or the dog and some other stuff, we start to break down these barriers between us and say, I am more than just a robot coming into this. I have a personal life. Sure, I'll be accountable for all the deliverables, but I'm just more than me over here at work. And I've seen some beautiful moments of, these, kids come jumping on calls and they're apologizing. And I'm just like, what is your little girl's name? Tell me, what does she have to say about this? And, I think it can be used to kind of break down and us feel more inclusive, because, we didn't really have to think about all of our unique differences, but there are so many combinations of, I have younger people that I'm friends with, and they can't wait to go back to the office because they have 400 square feet in Manhattan. And like that, they need that office space to grow the real estate. And then I know some other people who are like, I'm transitioning to retirement. This is perfect. And I've heard stories from my colleagues at HP in the way past decades where HP went and up and down into different phases of remote where, they really wanted at one point of their life, these are people who've been at HP for 30 years, in the beginning of their career, they really enjoyed coming to the office. But then as they started having kids and a family, they were able to work from home, and they really valued, with their small kids and being around them for after school homework and go through. But then as they kind of grown up, they really want to go back into the office. So that flexibility through life to accommodate. And you talk to any of these people that said that, then, when they feel included at work and they feel productive in all sorts of aspects, people are happier. They're more, have a better time at work. They're going to stay with you. They're going to give their best selves at work. And, this work from home is just can be one more piece on us of organizations and leaders to be even more inclusive to everybody. And to Amy's point, if you can get talent that you couldn't have gotten before, that can help with your diversity goals, inclusive, and make everyone feel more included. There's no reason why you can't blend all these different initiatives together to some degree where it makes sense.
Great. Thank you, Pedro. That was really good insight.
I can chime in, Matt. And so I think at US Cellular, I think people are being more creative in coming up with innovative ideas because of the work from home. So being able to pick up and move to my backyard and sit outside and be able to think, right, has allowed me that space, and I know has allowed other people the space to come up with different ideas and different ways of doing things that maybe we wouldn't have thought about if we were all sitting around a whiteboard in a conference room. And so I think that ability to have that space to have that ability to think and just take that time to be more innovative, people are coming up with different ideas that, like I said, I don't think would have come up in a conference room whiteboard session. I mean, maybe they would have after 2 hours. I mean, I know I used to be in some marathon sessions all day, but being able just to take this laptop and, go down to the park or go down to the coffee house now that it's open and grab a cup of coffee and sit there and have that time to think, I think has been a game changer. I mean, before the pandemic and we closed our offices, we had just redone an office remodel and we put in a lot of what I'm going to call those think spaces and places to go with your cup of coffee and have a quiet time and just, hopefully spark some innovative ideas. But I think being at home and being able to pick up and move around has really helped spark a lot of that at US Cellular.
Great. Thank you, Amy. That's good insight. And it made me think a little bit about my situation. You're all the supply chain professionals, but I'm sure there's many others that could relate to any of our situation, or particularly mine. During the pandemic, we learned my older daughter is diabetic. So now that I work from home, if I need to go to the school nearby and help with an insulin administration or deal with a low blood sugar, it's immensely easier than it would be if I was in the office. So that was a good addition to this panel that kind of tugged at some heartstrings a bit. Jim, I'm going to jump back to you. What sort of impact will a remote or hybrid work environment have on workforce development? Is someone going to be able to get the development they need to move up, get that promotion, impress the executive team?
Well, that's a great question, Matt. Just as, we try to approach, hey, what are the challenges for leaders in this type of environment? We mentioned, we got to be mindful of other people's kind of work environments, but we need to be inclusive of them as well. I think addressing your question directly, there's that knockoff effect for next year or the time after annual performance appraisals come out. Those remote workers, either through necessity or self-selection, they want to be included in development as just in the workforce. They want to be promoted. Obviously, they want to be full members of the team, stakeholders, and actually, I would imagine, developed exactly like their peers into leadership positions as well. So that leadership development, workforce development is a challenge that we need when we're thinking of being inclusive, to look at that dimension as well, for not just in how we operate on our teams and how we build our teams, that's really how we build our companies and develop our leaders. So that whole mindset needs to be changed in DNA along the way. And I envision that as kind of like, working from home is kind of like a 2020, 2021 kind of a challenge. In 2022, we're going to have this next level of sophisticated challenges. Like right now, we've got our hybrid array. We kind of know what we're doing as a company. The dust has settled, and now let's look at the long-term projects and programs that are people related that are affected by this. And leadership development is right at the top of that list.
Wrapping up, I would often say during the pandemic that the crystal balls were all down. We are not completely out of the pandemic. We see the light at the end of the tunnel, but I'm going to ask you all to see if your crystal balls are working. I'm going to go around the horn this one last time and ask, what do you think your workplace from a supply chain perspective is going to look like in 3 years? And Amy, I'll start with you.
Okay, we'll see how accurate my crystal ball is in about 3 years, because I'm going to pull this webinar out and I'm going to watch it. But I think, we're going to still be in that hybrid mode. So, we consider ourselves, even though we're a wireless company, to be a technology company, right? And so it goes back to gaining and retaining that talent. And I think a lot of companies are going to find the benefits of hybrid outweigh the benefits of a old traditional 100% in office model. And so for me, I think in the supply chain world, I think, we're going to be hybrid for this foreseeable future. And I think, for us, it's going to work and it's going to be good. And I think you're going to see an increase of productivity. Picking back off of Pedro, I think the D&I is hugely important. And I think we're going to see more of diversity and inclusion in what we do, and being able to, like I talked about earlier, gain and retain that talent, that top talent that we need to run our supply chain.
Jim?
I largely think that my work environment is going to be unchanged in 3 years. Google is a global company. We have several 3PLs and several functions that are externalized. Our work teams, specifically, like I say, the supply chain team, for one, is in 5 different time zones today. And whenever we meet, we're all remote one way or another. So our virtual 100% aspect will be preserved, and our operation will just be a little more complex, because we will have a workforce in the office, and we'll have a continued workforce working remotely throughout the globe.
And Pedro?
Just like Jim, kind of largely unchanged. I think for a lot of us knowledge workers, we'll probably see the least amount of change. But I also say, the cat is out of the bag. Technology is generally a one-way street where it keeps improving, and we will, I'm sure, see innovations between VR or Jim's campfire example, or just better integration of audio and mics and all sorts of other stuff that it will only just get better. And then in 3+ years, things that we saw as gray areas that can't be done remotely, we'll start seeing the beginnings of those remote forklift drivers that are remoting in segments or other stuff. There will be things that will be obvious to us in hindsight, but it's a one-way street up for having more flexibility, at least in the 3-year horizon, in my opinion.
That is just about all the time we have. I would like to thank the entire panel for giving us their time, expertise, and insights. If you have any questions you would like forward on to the panel, please send them to research@ascm.org.